Hello again. Jake Fengman, graduate student in American Christian Heritage at Liberty University. Today I'm going to be talking about the modernist view of Christianity and evolution in the 1920s. When I first started learning about fundamentalists and modernists, I was kind of surprised at how many Christian denominations didn't believe in the fundamental tenets. I grew up in a conservative Lutheran household, and so the fundamental tenets were always kind of taken for granted, and I always thought that all Christian denominations believed in those things. And so it kind of opened my eyes this last week learning about those. And so I wanted to look at what the modernist church leaders were saying about the debate in the 1920s. And as I found some newspaper articles in the New York Times, there was three things that really stood out to me. The first was the platforms that these leaders were using to talk about these things. The second was how the media covered it. And the third was the intertwined nature of some of the fundamentals. The first article I found was from 1926, and it was talking about Reverend Caleb R. Stetson's sermon at the first baccalaureate service for New York University's Graduate School of Business Administration. And he was quoted as saying, "Agitation by fundamentalists against the idea of evolution is an evidence of fear, not faith." And what surprised me about this article was that he was using a graduation ceremony for a business administration program to talk about the evolution debate. And that really surprised me that was a platform that modernists would be using to talk about that. And the second article, again from the New York Times, was from 1923. There's an article about the consecration of Reverend Dr. James E. Freeman as the third bishop of the Protestant Episcopal Diocese of Washington. And in the article, it talked about how Bishop Manning of New York gave the sermon. And in the sermon, he called the fundamentalist view of evolution and science stigmatized and outdated. And he said that nothing in the Christian faith conflicts with the theory of evolution. But what really surprised me about this article was the title. The title was "Declares Science No Menace to Faith. Bishop Manning says fundamentalists' fears have no justification, favors evolution theory. He expresses these views in sermon at Consecration of Bishop Freeman in Washington." In my mind, what the news story was that Bishop Freeman was being consecrated as the bishop in Washington. But in the 1920s, what the news story was that this Bishop Manning was talking about the evolution debate in his sermon. And the final article I found was, again, in the New York Times, in 1922, and it was an article about Reverend Dr. Stuart L. Tyson. And in this article, he quoted Reverend Charles Gore's book, Belief in God, as saying the stories from early in Genesis, the creation story, the Garden of Eden, the flood, the Tower of Babel, all of those stories weren't historical accuracies. They were inspired folklore. What struck me about that was not that I was surprised that he believed that or wrote that, but that it hit me that some of the fundamentals are intertwined. And I say that because it speaks to the inherency of the Scripture. If you don't believe the creation story, which is wrote about in Scripture, then you can't believe that Scripture is inherently infallible, which is another one of the tenets. So I hope you learned something like I did. My eyes have been open this week, and I learned something about the modernists in the 1920s and how they were talking about the evolutionary debate. And I look forward to your responses and continuing the conversation.